Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Howdy, 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 everybody. Welcome to another episode of Learn Photography with Duck. We are doing our Photoshop edition, so thank you for joining me. January, we had our first snowfall here in Connecticut a few days ago. Woke up this morning, I looked out the window and where did all the snow go? It's like, it came, it said hi, it says I'm not hanging around, bye. So, I don't know. Anyway, hope everybody's doing good. I know everybody's kind of been hunkering down as the spikes in coronavirus start going back up. I have some very close friends that have come down with it. Fortunately, nothing that was as scary as when the coronavirus first came in. It was killing people left and right. Fortunately, now it's a little bit more manageable, and God willing, it'll stay that way. But anyway, they're all doing well. And it just amazed me how many in my little circle of people that I know have actually contracted it. It's scary, really scary. So hope everybody's staying safe. So anyway, today I'm going to be covering a lot. I'm going to be sharing with you my my portrait editing workflow. And hopefully what you learned today you can use towards your own portrait work. And of course, this month's challenge is the monthly challenge is to create some kind of moody portrait. Moody meaning, utilize the light to create some kind of mood for your image, whether it's something a little bit on the dark side or something, a little bit on the light side, but something where, the light plays into the mood of the image would be great. So anyway, if you decide to do something with that, the challenge, make sure you get it in before next Monday. All right, email it to me. Make sure that the file name has your name on it so I know who submitted it. And we will talk about how you came about creating it next week. Okay? Awesome. Because I'm going to be going over a lot of stuff, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share my screen and cross fingers that nothing breaks. All right. So let me go ahead and where's my screen share? Share screen, windowed projection, say share. Okay. Good. All right. Everybody sees me, right? Okay. Awesome. Where's my, my camera is a little crooked here. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is walk you through kind of my workflow that I use for portraits, where I want to put a little bit more effort in making my subject look good. All right. So whenever I do any corporate headshots, or just like headshots for social media, or even like a family portrait, which I do very little of. I tend to do more corporate headshots and business headshots than anything else. But we want to present them in the best possible light, and that means putting a little bit of extra care and effort into making them look good, in their portrait. So I have a workflow that I've evolved, over the past couple of years that really works well for me, and I wanted to share it with you. But I want you to understand that this is just kind of the way I work. It doesn't necessarily have to be the way you work, all right? But if you are unfamiliar with how to retouch a portrait, maybe this will offer you a place to start. And then as you progress and you learn new tricks and tips, you can incorporate them into your workflow and make that workflow yours, okay? Now, the workflow that I created also has a certain amount of flexibility depending on how much work I need to put into a particular... I'm seeing two Brians. That was weird. Depending on how much work you need to put into a particular portrait, okay? Obviously, if you're going to be doing something where it's like the high fashion photography, you're going to put a little bit more effort into it. Something that's used for a commercial client, you're going to put a little bit more effort into it, as compared to, maybe something that you're just doing for a corporate headshot. So anyway, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my desktop. And as I've said before, I always start and end in Lightroom. Okay, Lightroom's kind of my go-to program for initializing all my edits. All right, so I recently did a headshot session for a guy some of you may recognize. His name is Ed Daly. He is a photographer. He's been to a lot of photography events in the past. Not so much lately. He just landed himself a new job, and he wanted to update all his social media and business outlets with this new look. And while we were at it, he decided he wanted to do something a little bit fun and creative as well. So we spent a few hours here in my studio, played around with getting some business looks as well as some kind of funky casual looks. Okay. So I am actually in the process of editing these. All right. So the first thing you'll notice is some of these have a green border around them. And I use green as an indicator that I am done with that particular file. Okay. So everything that you see green has already been edited. Everything that is the default gray means that I need to still address those images and get to work on them. So as you can see, I got quite a few that I need to finish up. And he was gracious enough to give me permission to use one of his images today as part of our lesson. All right. So if you ever bump into Ed Daly on a photo shoot, just tell him that you saw one of his portraits get edited. Okay. And the one that I want to look at, or rather, the one that I want to edit today is this one, because as you can see, it illustrates very moody lighting. Okay, he's lit in what's called a split lighting, where one side of his face is lit, the other side of his face is in shadow. And of course, his body is open towards the light. Okay. So, like I said, I always start my edits in Lightroom. And the one thing that I'm going to do here in Lightroom is I'm going to normalize the image. All right. And the first thing that I will do is I will go ahead and change my color profile. And for these, I chose the my camera portrait profile. I thought that gave me a very decent color with. Okay. And then as you guys know, I apply a certain amount of editing on ingest. All right. So it applied my, my little import pop and squat preset that I talked about previously. And then I just went ahead and I adjusted accordingly. So in this case, I actually went up on the highlights a little bit in order to create a little bit more light on his skin. And because he's wearing black, I decided to really open up the blacks a little bit more in order to bring out some of that texture in the clothing so he doesn't disappear completely into shadow. Okay. And that is pretty much it as far as normalizing the image. Okay. There is no horizon to make sure that I am nice and level, so I don't have to worry about that. And then the other thing that some people will do at this stage is they will go ahead and crop accordingly. I don't. If I know I'm going to bring or sending the image into Photoshop, I will go ahead and send it at the full native resolution that I shot it in. And then after I've done my edits, I'll come back and crop accordingly. And the reason I do it in that particular manner is that while it is in Photoshop, I want to be able to edit and fix the entire image just in case in Lightroom I want to change my cropping on the fly. All right. Once I crop it in Lightroom and then send it to Photoshop, that crop tends to get baked in. So if I were to crop it, let's say I crop it to an 8:10 aspect ratio, and I decide I'm just going to zoom in on a relatively close-up. When I send this to Photoshop, it's going to keep that format, and I'm going to lose all that information. So now I'm going to be doing all these edits, and if I come back and if it says, hey, you know what, that crop's a little bit too tight. I thought we had shot this a little bit looser. Can you show me what it looks like a little bit looser? Well, guess what? I can't. It's already baked in. But if I wait until after, I can always come back and reset my my crop. Okay. So for that reason, I reserve my cropping to the very, very end when I'm done with Photoshop and bring it back into Lightroom. Make sense? Okay. So let's go ahead and I will reset that. Okay. So I got it looking fairly decent. I'm not going to worry about any of the like the spot healing or the dodging and burning at this point. All right, I'm going to reserve that for the Photoshop part. Okay, simply because there are certain things that are a little bit easier in Photoshop than they are in Lightroom, even though both can do the same thing. All right, some things, like Lightroom just redid their whole masking aspect. It's better. There's a lot more flexibility to it than the previous version, but it's still a little bit clunky. It's not as fluid to work with masks as it is in Photoshop. So for that case, I will reserve those types of edits for Photoshop rather than taking them in Lightroom. Okay. So what I've done is, like I said, I opened up the highlights to put a little bit more light on his face. I opened up the blacks. Let me just reset the blacks. All right. And the reason I, excuse me, the reason I opened up the blacks is if you look up at the histogram up here, you can see how the blacks are kind of crushed up against that left side wall, right? And if you look at the little triangle above there, you can see that that little triangle is lit, meaning that we are crushing some of the blacks, or some of the blacks into blacks with no tonality, right? So in essence, I am setting my black point by opening up my blacks. All right. So if I open up blacks, you can see how it pulls away from that left-hand wall. All right. So in essence, I am readjusting my black point. Okay. And of course, my white point is, there's literally very little information in the whites and the highlights area. All right, so this would be considered a low-key image. All right, this is a low-key image. All right, and one way you can tell is just by looking at the histogram. All right, you can see that center line, which is our 50% gray. Okay, everything is to the left. Everything is to the dark side. All right, so when everything is to that dark side, or the majority of it being to the dark side of that 50%, that lets you know it's a low-key image. Okay? All right. So enough with the Lightroom. Let's get it over to Photoshop. All right? So what I tend to do is I tend to open Photoshop first. Okay? Where's my Photoshop? Let's switch over. All right. I have Photoshop open. Now, if you don't have Photoshop open, when you send your image from Lightroom to Photoshop, Lightroom will open it for you. But unfortunately, it takes time. Photoshop has to load up, right, and open before it can transfer the file. So if I know I'm going to be working in Photoshop, I'll go ahead and open it right away. That way, when I send my image to Photoshop, Photoshop is already open and it goes much quicker, all right? So you can do File, let's see, what is it? I never do it this way, of course, now that I need to do it. File, no, Photo, Edit in Adobe Photoshop, okay? But I normally just do Control E, which does the same thing. Or you can right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop. Okay. And once you click on that, or once you do the Control E, I then go ahead and switch over to Photoshop. It's going to read the camera raw information and open up the image with all the Lightroom settings already added to the image. Okay? That simple. Okay, so now we get to the meat of the processing. Excuse me one second. The heat in my studio is pretty warm, so I know I'm going to be running dry. And if you see me sipping, I apologize for sipping in front of you, but otherwise I'm going to kill my voice. All right. So now, let's talk about a few things. Okay. One of the things that I tell people is you want to make your job as easy as possible, right? So one of the things that I've done is I've created an action that sets up my file for processing as a portrait, right? So if I open up my Actions tab, okay, there's one here that's called Portrait Workflow. Okay, and I've actually assigned it a shortcut key. All right, so Shift Control F2. I assigned that. Okay, but also if you notice right below that, I have a bunch of other actions: skin smoothing, high pass sharpen, frequency separation, dodge and burn, auto align layers, spot removal, a skin tone chart, teeth whitening, and iris enhance. All right, so these are all actions that will set up the file for those specific tasks. So if I need to do teeth whitening, I have an action that I just activate, and it sets up my files with the appropriate layers. Okay, so I have all these actions that I use for my portrait retouching. And what I've noticed, all right, again, just like your presets, pay attention to how you work. I noticed that there's a certain order that I always go in, right? I always do my spot removal first. Then I'll do my dodge and burn. And then I'll do my color correction, right? And then because the frequency separation tends to be a little bit on the destructive side, I tend to reserve that for last, unless it requires something drastic, okay? Because once you do your frequency separation, it kind of messes up what you can do non-destructively and becomes a bit of a headache. And I'll show you what I mean a little bit later on. Okay. So I always start off with my spot removal. All right. So I have my spot removal action, Shift F8. All right. Or you can just highlight it and activate it. And all it does is it creates a layer and it names it automatically for me. So it's a very simple action. All right. You can see it really doesn't do a lot. Okay. And I usually do 2 of these layers, and you'll understand why as I move forward. Okay. And then I'll do my iris enhance. Well, he's not showing any teeth, so I don't have to do anything about teeth whitening, etc., etc., etc. All right. But after a while, this gets a little menial. So what I decided to do was combine all of these into its own action. All right. So I have an action here called Portrait Workflow. All right. And if we zoom down, you can see it says play the action spot removal. All right. And it does it twice. All right. And then I put it into a group. Then I play the action dodge and burn, iris enhance. All right. Make it into a group. Play the action teeth whitening, an action called PixImperfect skin tone, and I'll explain what that is. All right. And then make it into a group and so on. All right. And the reason I do that is now, instead of going in and activating a bunch of different actions all the time, I can just go in with my Control Shift F2 and it sets up my file with everything I need for that portrait retouching. Okay. And it organizes it into groups. All right. So I can always turn off a group whenever I need it. Okay. And it also gives me a couple of check layers. Okay. Now, a check layer is a temporary effect that allows you to look for certain aspects of the image file in order to do your correction. Okay. And the ones that I use a lot is the spot check layer, right? Which I use both when I'm doing people and products. All right, this is a great one, and I'll explain it to you in a minute. And my skin blemish check layer, which I use when I'm working on people. Okay, and all they do is here, like for example, the spot check layer. All it does is creates a curve adjustment where I make this kind of like zigzag pattern. And what it's doing is it's really skewing the way the colors are being represented in order to make certain things really pop forward. All right. So if I turn this off, for example, and I zoom up into this area, all right, this was shot against my wall. And you can see that there's some flaws in the wall. There's a lot of texture caused by the paint. There's also some flaws caused by the taping compound on the joints of that wall. All right, that kind of stand forward and look kind of ugly, and I want to make sure that I correct for these things. All right. So when you're zoomed out a little bit, all right, depending on your lighting, sometimes these are real easy to see. All right, so you can probably see these fairly clearly, but sometimes they're not as easy to see. For example, all right, and you'll love this one. For example, can you see any of the sensor spots? My camera, unfortunately, was a little bit on the dirty side, and there are sensor spots. Okay, I can see a couple. If now that I'm starting to look for them, I can see there's one here, there's one here, there's one here, but they're very, very difficult to see. You have to really look at them. But once I activate a check layer, okay, look at that. This one here really stands out. This one here really stands out. All right. This one pops out a little bit more. Oh, there's one here that I hadn't noticed before. Okay. But you can also see the flaws in the wall stand out a little bit more. All right. Here's one that was a little bit difficult to see. Here's another one that was difficult to see. Okay. So having this type of check layer can really help facilitate the cleanup. Okay. And the nice thing is that, you can turn them on and turn them off as needed as you work. Okay. The other one, let me zoom in on Ed here a little bit. The other one is for skin blemishes. And I want to warn you, all right, if you decide to use this, all right, and let's say you take a picture of your significant other. You want to make sure that you are not editing their photo while they are in the same room with you. Because if they see you pop this check layer on them, they are going to have a fit. Okay? Because it tends to highlight, let me see if I can zoom in, tends to highlight a lot of the flaws. All right? Now, here you can see that there's something on his forehead here. He had a little pimple that kind of broke there, right? But you can see some of the pores, right? And as soon as I turn it off, you'll notice that it's not as noticeable, okay? It's not as noticeable. What this layer does is it really exaggerates the red blemishes in somebody's skin tone, okay? And this is a great way of being able to clean up the skin a lot easier, okay? Because it really shows you, oh, here's a blemish there, definitely there. There's one here, all right? There's some on his cheekbone that we can clean up, okay? Otherwise, it looks pretty good. But if you want to do high-end retouching, all right, here's some lighter ones that really don't show when you turn this filter off, all right? They're there, but they're not in your face. But if you want to create that blemish-free skin tone, putting this on allows you to really see all these blemishes. Oh, that might be a little bit too far in, okay? You can see all these blemishes, and then you can correct for them. Okay? All right, so let me zoom back out. If you are interested in these check layers, let me know, and because I'm thinking of doing a Patreon session on some of these. Okay, but basically, what this is a black and white layer. All right, so you go to adjustments, you create a black and white layer. Okay. And what you're doing is you're taking the red slider and you're bringing it to the darker side. So anything that is red is going to get darker, okay? And if you want, you can either increase the yellow to give it a little bit of contrast, okay? And then you just play around with that, okay? There's no green, there's no cyan, there's no blue in the skin, so we don't have to worry about that. There's really no magenta in the skin, so you don't have to worry about that. So basically, it's the red and the yellow sliders. And let me zoom in. And all you're doing is you're manipulating those, all right, in order to make the blemishes really stand out. Okay? That's all it is. It's that simple, okay? And then what I did is I just recorded an action, so that way whenever I need that, it just pops it in, all right? And my action, you will notice that it adds the label so that when I'm looking down my layer list, I know exactly what this layer does. This is my skin blemish check layer, all right? And I color it red, all right, because I know it's my default for being a check layer, something that I can delete after I'm done with my edits, all right? So this is a temporary layer, all right? I'm probably not going to save it with my my file, because once I'm done using it, it has no effect on the finished product, all right? So I usually get rid of it, all right? And the same thing with my spot check layer. I name it, I color it, and I'm done, okay? All right, any questions so far? Good? All right, you're following along, good. Okay, so my action that I use creates three groups, okay? A spot removal, a dodge and burn, and a color correction, all right? And it populates it with a certain number of layers. So for example, my spot removal, gives me 2 blank layers. That's all they are. They're just completely transparent blank layers. Okay. And I named it spot removal. Right. And of course, I label it green. Right. Meaning that this is going to be an active layer that I'm going to keep for my finished product. All right. And that is the first group. All right. So that tells me that's my first step, is going in and cleaning up all my spots. Okay. The second layer is my dodge and burn. Okay. And in here I have, you can see, a dodge and burn layer. And all this is a layer filled with 50% gray, and the layer blend on this has been changed to overlay. Okay. Okay. So if you look here on the first group is your darken layers, or your darken effects. The next one is your lighten effects. All right, and then the third group is kind of like your specialty group, or that works more on that 50% gray effect. All right, so what this does is, if I add white to this 50% gray and make it lighter, it's going to lighten the layer underneath it. If I add black, it is going to darken the layer underneath it. So I can use it both for lightening and darkening specific areas of the image underneath. Okay. Then right above that, I have my iris enhance, and all this is a curves adjustment layer that brightens. All right. And if you notice that my layer mask is black, meaning it's going to hide the effect. So all I got to do is take a brush, come in on the eyes and lighten them up, and you'll see me do it in a little bit. But that's all it is. It's just a simple curves adjustment layer that brightens. Okay. And of course, everything is labeled properly, so I know what it is. That's what the action basically does. All right, the third layer is my color correction. All right, and this includes my teeth whitening. All right, something I recommend people do. He's not smiling, showing teeth, so we're not going to be using that today. But you know what I'll do is I'll see if I can show it to you with maybe another image. Okay, and then I have 2 layers. And I borrowed this I learned this from PixImperfect. All right. If you don't know who Unmesh Dinda is on PixImperfect, I highly recommend you check out his YouTube channel. He is a master Photoshop retoucher, and he has a channel that's been going strong for I don't know how many years, and he just got this great ability to teach Photoshop that I really appreciate and am envious of the way he teaches. But anyways, he showed this technique of kind of like correcting colors for skin tone, and I borrowed this from him, so I'll explain it later on. Okay, and basically that's it. Those are the only 3 steps. Now, there is one fourth and final step that is not here, and the reason it's not here is because it tends to be destructive, and that is my frequency separation action. Frequency separation. Okay? And what frequency separation does is it takes your image and rips it apart into 2 pieces. One layer has all the texture, and the other layer has all the color. And then when combined together, you get your finished results. That allows you to work independently either on the color layer or the texture layer, right? I'm not going to get into frequency separation today, simply because it's fairly complex in and of itself. But the way it works is it makes a clone stamp layer of everything. So you do all your edits, you do all your color correction, all your dodging and burning, all your spot removal, and then you make a copy of all those layers together in a single layer, all right? Clone stamp layer. It then takes that layer and rips it apart into the two pieces. So you can see it's a little bit on the destructive side. Everything that you did previously gets baked in, and once you do your frequency separation, there's no going back to one of the previous layers and making an adjustment, all right? That's why it's not here, because that is on a per image basis if it needs it. And if it does need it, I will activate it at that point simply because it's pretty destructive. Okay, so hopefully you understand what I mean by that. All right, so let's get into editing Mr. Daly here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do all my spot removal. And I'm going to do it all on these blank layers. Okay, and they really are just a blank layer, right? Nothing on it. Okay, and I'm going to go to my Magic Spot Healing brush, my Spot Healing brush tool. Okay, sometimes I may use the patch tool, right? And I think I'll show you how that works. But most of the time, I'm just using the Spot Healing tool. All right. The other tool that I might use here, if the spot healing becomes a little bit problematic, is the clone stamp tool. All right. If I need very precise control, this is my go-to tool, is the clone stamp tool. All right. So I'll see if I can show you what they all mean or what they all do. All right. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to zoom in. Right, and we're going to look at those that they look like drips. May have been a drip from the paint, or may have been, I don't know, some excess drywall compound. Who knows? Probably paint. All right, but it's kind of making this really ugly looking just drip going down. There's one going down here. There's another one here. Right, it's just looking very terrible. Okay. So one way we can do this is we can use our patch tool, all right? When we select our patch tool, if we go to our toolbar at the top, all right, you can see that it says patch. Make sure that it's content aware, all right? And you want to sample all layers. Sample all layers, okay? In all practicality, what I would want it to do is sample all layers, and I would love it to have it this layer and below. Okay, and but that option is not available with this particular tool. It is with some other tools, but not this one, and I don't understand why. All right, but as you move forward, if you say to yourself, oh my God, I missed a spot, but you've already done all your dodging and burning and color correcting, when you go back down to the spot removal tool, right, it's going to take and sample everything above and apply it to that spot removal layer. Okay, so now if you have, let's say you brightened up a spot, it's going to take that bright spot and do a spot removal and bring it down below the layer that you added the brightening, all right? And it's going to brighten it again, okay? Because that layer above is still affecting everything below it. So you need to be aware of that and make sure that once you start doing your dodging burning, if you have to drop to the layer, to the group layer below, that you turn the visibility off. So that way you're not brightening on top of the brightening. All right? Hopefully that makes sense. If I remember, I'll see if I can illustrate what I mean by that. Okay? The other thing you can do as part of your workflow, if it makes sense to you, is go ahead and turn the visibility of those off. You're going to see that it doesn't affect anything because nothing has been done to those layers, but it might be a visual cue for you to say, well, they're off. I haven't gotten to them yet. I still need to work on them. And that just kind of keeps you track of where you are. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to my first spot removal. Right. I got my patch tool and I'm just going to draw a circle around that drip there. It's going to highlight it. And I'm just going to slide it over and find a nice blank area of the wall. And it's going to apply that section. All right. And you can see that it's looking a little funky. So I'm going to back that out. Okay. Check my structure. Maybe not so much. I'm going to bring my structure. All right. Structure is right up here. Okay, I'm going to bring my structure down to 3, right? That's just how it takes, oh, cancel, I don't know what I just did, how it samples from the blank area in order to use as your cover, all right? So it's still looking terrible. So let me go over to the darker side. Oh, not liking that. Okay. There we go. Looking a little bit better. Okay. This one here. Make a selection. Move it over. All right. And that is gone. Little one here. All right. So you can see this does a pretty decent job of, cleaning these up. Okay. And all you got to do is just select an area that matches what you're trying to cover up. All right, but be careful that you don't create duplicating spots. All right, if you sample, all right, so for example, let me see. All right, here's a sensor spot I need to get rid of. All right, but see this little blemish here? All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that sensor spot and I'm going to select it where that blemish is. All right. And you'll notice that it made a duplicate of that blemish. When you're using this tool, you have to be cognizant of what you're selecting from. You don't want to be selecting areas that is going to create some kind of repeating pattern. All right. So be aware of that. Okay. So that's the patch tool. All right. The one that I prefer, because it works so very well, is the spot healing brush, right? And like any brush, you can change the size of the brush, okay? And you can also change the hardness and softness of the brush, right? So you can size it, and then you can change the hardness, make it soft, or make it really, really hard, okay? I prefer to use a soft or fairly soft, not completely soft, but a fairly soft brush, okay? And what you do is you just find the flaw that you're trying to cover up, and then you just brush over it, and the Adobe Sensei, your Adobe AI, is going to find the appropriate match in order to cover that up. And you can see I can go fairly quickly with this. Now, here's where that check layer comes into play. All right, once I apply my check layer, let me zoom out, okay? I can use that check layer and say, okay, well, there's, All right, and it didn't do a very good job. All right, there you go. Okay, and wherever I see a blemish, I can go ahead and just brush. Okay, and it does a very decent job. Okay. All right, I'm not liking this right there. All right, here's another sensor spot. This one is very obvious, but as soon as I turn it on, you can really see it right there. Okay. Oh, here's a big drip that I hadn't noticed before. Okay, let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. All right, so you can go fairly crazy with the retouching. All right, but like for example, this one right here next to his face. Let me undo that. Okay, if I turn my spot check layer off, okay, it's barely noticeable. Okay, barely noticeable. However, because it's right next to his face, it might be just that little bit distracting, right? So I'm going to go ahead and eliminate that, okay? Everything else, well, I'll just go for whatever is blatantly obvious, all right? So here's this streak that's very blatantly obvious, all right? So I can just take my brush, I can go down the length of these blemishes, all right, and just get rid of them. Just like that, okay? All right, fairly simple, right? Okay, I'm gonna look at his clothing, all right, make sure that there's no dust bunnies, little pieces of lint, okay? Here's something maybe, okay, on his shirt. Oh yeah, here we go. There's something here and here. There's two spots here. I spotted those, but they're very much more obvious when you put your check layer, okay? And it takes a little bit of practice to understand what it is that you're looking at, because what it's doing is it's inverting some of the colors, all right? Here's something right here. You can see that white streak, okay? If I turn that check layer off, it's barely imperceptible, but it's there, okay? All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get rid of it, all right? Okay, and that's pretty much it, okay? For skin tone, I'm not gonna use this check layer. For skin tone, I'm going to go to my skin blemish check layer, okay? And by default, I have it so that the reds are really, really crushed down to almost black, all right? As you can see in this particular case, because there's already a lot of shadow in the image, turning whatever red is there to black just enhances that shadow and obscures what it is that I'm looking at. So even though my action by default does this, because it's adjustable, I can always come in and back that up as needed, all right? And now I can see all the blemishes, all right? Again, something you don't want to see, or you don't want to show your client as you're working on them, because then they'll become very self-conscious of it. So Ed, if you're watching the replay of this, I apologize for making you look so ugly. You are a handsome guy. This is very temporary. That's my disclaimer. All right, so I have my healing brush. Okay, I'm going to size it down a little bit, and I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. See, here I was playing around with that one. Got to make sure I'm coming back down to my spot removal. All right, and I'm just going to go in, and a lot of these, all I have to do is literally just touch, little point with your mouse, just click, 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 click. All right, I'm using my pen tablet here, so I have a little bit easier control. All right, but a lot of these are just little points, that I click and I get rid of. Okay. All right. And of course, how deep do you want to go down this particular rabbit hole is entirely up to you. Okay. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up his cheek a little bit. He had shaven earlier in the day, so he was just starting to get a little bit of that 5 o'clock shadow come in, and I want to clean that up. So with this check layer, I can see where all the dark spots are from his 5 o'clock shadow coming back in, as well as some of those pores that are fairly open. Okay, now the word of warning here is typically what you want to do is you want to fix what are considered temporary blemishes. Temporary blemishes, right? So pimples, definitely, those are very temporary, all right? But something that's a little bit more permanent, all right? Maybe somebody has a facial scar, that's very prominent. Somebody has maybe a mole or a wine stain, all right? I will not completely remove them. I will do something else. And that's what this second spot removal layer is for that I have here. All right. So if you look, I have one layer here for spot removal. That's the one I'm currently using. And then I have a second one here. That's also, it does the exact same thing, but I'm going to target something completely different with this layer. All right. That's why I have two, and I'll show you what I mean in a minute. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and do all my cleanups. All right, his cheek's looking a little bit cleaner. All right. Okay, and occasionally what you'll want to do is turn off that layer. Make sure that, everything's looking good. Okay. The other thing that I'm going to caution you on, notice that I'm not zoomed into micro scale here. All right, I'm not zoomed into micro scale. I'm not looking down each and every pore, all right, at this ridiculously zoomed in area. Okay, there's no need. Okay, there's no need, simply because you're never going to be looking at this portrait that closely anyway. You just want to make sure you get all the major blemishes done. Okay. The other thing that I tend to do, he kind of has very close cropped hair, but somebody with longer hair, I will take care of like flyaways. All right. Obviously, he doesn't have flyaways, but what he does have is maybe a look at the silhouette of his beard, right? And I might clean that up a little bit if it's a little bit distracting. Let me turn that layer off. Okay. This is on the shadow side, so it doesn't really make a big difference, but on the highlight side, it might. Okay. Sometimes. Okay. It's not too bad. All right. But sometimes, you might have this one strand of hair that just kind of like breaks out and it becomes very obvious. Okay. All right. Okay. Got something here in the eye. A little bit here. Okay, a little bit there. Okay, now it's looking a lot better. All right, so let me show you what I mean. Let me bring this up. Here's before. Here's the after. Before, after. Okay. So you can see that it really cleans up the skin. And a lot of people will say, well, why are you cleaning up all that stuff? That's him. That's who he is, right? But if you really think about it, it all comes down to the psychology of vision. When we are talking with somebody, right, we don't see all these minor flaws. One, we are at a distance to that person, right? So it's not like we're using our microscopic vision to spot all these flaws. But secondly, the person is always in motion. You really can't see all those flaws, right? They don't register when we look at them. But as soon as it becomes an image, we have the luxury of stopping time and really taking a closer look at who the person is. All right. And at that point, we can start seeing some of these flaws. All right. So my philosophy is the flaws that you don't see in real life are the flaws that I'm going to get rid of in a portrait. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Now, this one's for the ladies. Okay. They want to get rid of the wrinkles. Guys, well, they tend to look a little bit tougher with the wrinkles, all right? A little bit more hardy, a little bit more rough, you know? But even in that case, I might do something typically around the eyes, right? If somebody has bags or heavy wrinkles around their eyes, I'm going to tone it down. I'm not going to completely remove it because, well, then that's just going to remove like 10, 20 years from them. And now all of a sudden, they're not going to look like who they are. Okay? They're going to look at the portrait and says, ooh. And they see you in real life and go, ooh, you're a lot older than your picture. Right? That's not the message you want to get. All right? You want people to look at your portrait and look at you and see the same person. Okay? So please be aware of that. All right. So I'm going to use my second spot removal layer, all right, because I created two. I'm going to use my second one, and I'm still going to use my spot removal brush tool, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to target, all right, again, notice I'm not up close and personal to every pore and wrinkle, right? I'm still fairly open. I'm going to target all the wrinkles that are very obvious. And I'm just going to get rid of them. Right? Now you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, didn't you just say you don't get rid of them? Well, yeah, but here's the magic of Photoshop. Right? One thing I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to get rid of them right now. Because as I'm working, I can see which ones I've done. All right? Because as soon as they disappear, I know I've targeted that particular wrinkle. I don't have to worry about it. Okay? So I'm going to go in, and some of these, like the forehead wrinkles, all right, I'll get rid of some of the big ones. Okay? He's got a lot of shadow on this side. Okay? I'm not going to worry about it, but I can always come into this check layer, all right, and use this check layer to kind of guide me if I want to, okay? And that looks pretty good, all right? If I turn that off, turn it back on, look at that. I removed like 20 years from him, right? Okay? But what I'm going to do is, at this point, I'm going to go to my opacity, and I'm going to alter the opacity. And my default for this step is usually about 40%. All right. And then you're just going to kind of judge it from there. So I just type in 40%. And you'll notice that the wrinkles came back, but they're not intense in your face. All right. So here, if I turn them off, turn them on, you can see that they're still there, but they're not as obvious, okay? And this is the effect that happens when we are talking face-to-face with a person. We can see that the person has a certain amount of character to their face, but because we're not dwelling on it, we're not getting that full impact, okay? We're not seeing every crack and crevice and wrinkle in high definition HR. All right. So we are mimicking that with our retouching. All right. So that's why I have a second layer, because this second layer, I can control the opacity to target just those areas that I want to diminish, not completely get rid of. Okay. Make sense? All right. And I think I forgot a little bit something here. Okay, looking good. Okay. Now I can zoom back out a little bit. Yeah, see? That looks good. And now, because there is a group for these layers, I can always turn the group off, turn the group back on. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's a very, very subtle change. Very subtle change. All right, it's a nice little cleanup. Okay, and that's it for this layer. I'm done. Okay, I'm done. All right, everything else, you know, looks really, really decent. Any questions on the spot removal so far? Anything? Okay. All right, so we're done with our spot removal. Now I go into the dodge and burn. The dodge and burn. Okay? And this is where I take the existing lighting and make it a little bit better if I need to. Okay? Highlight certain things and de-highlight others. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and work on the eyes. All right. In this particular pose, Ed is looking away from the light into the shadow area, and he has brown eyes. Okay, so his eyes are now in shadow, and his eyes are very dark. So I want to make sure that I can pop those out a little bit from the scene. Okay, so if I zoom in here, you can see there's color there, right? Hopefully you guys can see it in the video, right? There's color there. I want to bring that color and make it pop forward a little bit more, okay? So I have this curves adjustment layer. All right, here's my, actually, let me collapse. Can I collapse this? All right, I got my curves adjustment layer, and all I did is I took the center, and I brought it up just a little bit, okay? And then on my layer mask, I changed it to black. So now all I got to do is grab a nice soft round brush, make it, size it appropriate, make sure that white is my foreground color, all right, because I want to punch a hole in that mask. So white allows me to punch that hole. And I'm just going to go ahead and paint right around the outside, the color area, the iris of his eyes there and here. All right, now on the shadow side, it's probably not doing very much, very, very little, if anything at all. But I'm going to do it anyway, just because. Okay. So now if I turn that on and off, you can see that it adds just that little bit of spark to his eye. Okay. Now, because it is a curve adjustment, of course, I can always make him look like a vampire if I need to. All right. But obviously that looks, ghastly and fake. All right, I just want to create that little bit of glimmer in his eye. All right, that's all it needs to do. Okay, and that's it. That's all that there is for this particular layer retouching. Just a little half moon on the iris of his eye on both sides, and you're done. Simple. Okay. and that's all it is for dodging the eyes. Okay. Now some people will do this particular step in Lightroom. Okay. You can create a mask and do this little technique in Lightroom, but the way I look at it, whenever you add masks in Lightroom, it's creating a bulkier file, and I really don't need to bloat my Lightroom files for something as simple as this. Okay, if I were doing all my editing just in Lightroom, which sometimes I do, and not exporting it to Photoshop, then I will do it in Lightroom. But because I did come into Photoshop, I'd rather do it in Photoshop rather than Lightroom. Okay? All right. So now comes for the dodging and burning. Okay? And if you guys are interested in a session just on dodging and burning, let me know. Okay? But I have, if you look over on my left side of the screen, I have my brushes, okay? And I have, these are all custom brushes that I've made, all right? Because I also use Photoshop for illustration purposes. So I have some drawing brushes here, as well as, for just the retouching. But I made one here. It's called a color soft blend. Color soft blend. Okay. Let me make this. All right. And you can see that it's an irregularly shaped brush. All right. And all it does is it allows me to create soft blending of tonalities. Okay. So I tend to favor this, but because you guys don't have it, all you need is a generic soft round brush. The generic that comes with Photoshop, soft round brush. Okay? Soft round brush. I'm going to size it down. Okay? The trick to this is that you want your opacity, right? Your opacity to be very, very low. All right? So you want your opacity to be like 1%. Okay? Or sometimes even 5%. Very rarely will it go as high as 10%. Okay? And the reason being is that we're going to be using straight black and straight white to control our tones, but we're going to be applying it a little tiny bit at a time, because as you apply it, you're going to be working in layers. Okay? Oops, I'm on the wrong one. I'm on the wrong mask. Okay. There we go. D, X. All right. So in this case, I have white as my foreground color, black as my background color. Okay. If they're not that little double square, okay, let me zoom in, that little double square right above it, you click on that, it's going to change it to the default colors. And then that little arrow right next to it, when you click on that, it just toggles the foreground and background color. Or you can do what I do, is use the letter X on your keyboard to toggle back and forth between those two. All right, so I'm going to use white to brighten, okay? And now as I pass over, all right, actually, let me bring that up to 50% so you can see what it does. All right, as I pass over, you can see that it brightens that area. Every time I pass over, it's applying more white and it's brightening that area. Of course, it brightened this area to the point that it blew out the highlights. All right, so that's why you have to work in small increments. Okay, small increments. Now with my normal brush that I use for this, that I showed you, I work at 10% simply because my brush already has a low opacity to it. Okay, so let me go ahead and let me just make a new dodge and burn layer and get rid of this one here. Where's my delete? There we go. Okay. But a soft round brush. All right. I'm going to bring my flow up to 100. I'm going to start off at 1%. Okay. And I'm going to, size my brush down. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work around his eyes. And I want to get rid of like the darkness around his eyes. And I'm going to work very slowly, okay? And I'm going to lighten the tones up a little bit at a time. Now, as you do this, because your eyes adjust constantly to what you do, sometimes as you work, you lose track of how much did I lighten this, all right? So every once in a while, come on over to the layer and turn the visibility on the layer off. Turn it on so you can gauge for yourself how much you're lightening, okay? And then you can see that, what you're doing, you want it to look natural. You want it to look natural, okay? So we just want to get rid of that darkening around the eyes, okay? It's not so evident on the dark side of the face, so I'm not even going to bother with that, okay? And that's pretty much it for around his eyes, okay? Now, the nice thing about this is that if you see any discoloration in the skin, you can also use it to kind of smooth out some of that discoloration, right? And all you need to do is you just need to make your brush the appropriate size for what you need to work, all right? So if we take a look at this area of his forehead as I turn the visibility on and off. There's off, there's on, all right? So it's just a very subtle change, okay? And of course, I can switch over to my black, all right, to darken some aspects of it in order to balance out the tonality, all right? Before, after, okay? So all it does is it just moves out, okay? Ladies, if you want to darken your eyebrows, give yourself a nice soft brush. Make sure that black is your foreground color, and then just start layering in a little bit of black into the eyebrow. All right, and that's going to automatically darken your eyebrow. See, so you can even do a little bit of makeup application in Photoshop. Okay. All right. Things like wrinkles in the neck, personal choice. All right, but you can use the dodge and burn to minimize some of this as well if you need to. Okay, so if you want to give somebody an instant chin tuck, make sure that black is your foreground color. Give yourself a nice fairly large brush, all right, and then you're just going to darken underneath the chin. Okay. And what happens is that darkness helps recede that chin line, all right, by creating an artificial shadow underneath the chin. All right, and it's just very subtle change. Okay, let me back this out a little bit. Okay, before, after, before, after. Okay, so as you can see, it really doesn't alter his look significantly. It just makes him look that much better. Okay, all right. Any questions on the dodging and burning? Okay. The other thing that you can do with dodging and burning is you can accent certain highlights. All right. So let me zoom into the glasses here, for example. Okay. So here we have the glasses on, hanging from his collar. Right. I can make sure that I got white as my foreground color. Okay, make myself a nice small brush, and I can just paint right along that existing highlight to really make that highlight pop forward. Okay, and I can add highlight, maybe add highlight where there's none there. Okay, so if you notice that maybe part of something is a little lost and needs a little bit of definition, okay, I can go ahead and just go in and paint myself some highlights. All right, so before, after. All right, so that just gives it a very subtle contrast. Okay, and of course I did it to one side of the glasses. I'm going to go ahead and do it to the other side. Okay. Maybe expand the highlights here. All right. There we go. Turn it off, turn it on. There we go. Very subtle. I don't know if you guys can see that. All right. It's a very subtle move. Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll add some here. Turn it off, turn it on. Okay. Turn it off, turn it on. Very slight. Okay. So that's how you brighten something. That's called dodging. Okay. We burned a little bit under the chin, but now as I zoom out and look at the entire image, I want all my attention to go right here. Okay. This is my subject. Okay. But if we look at it, we see that this arm here is also very bright. So it's pulling some of my attention down to this area. All right. A little bit here, but it's not so bad, because if we look at the contrast between the bright area of the arm here and the gray, it's a lot less contrast than the bright area of the arm here and the black. All right, you can see that this contrast is a lot greater than this contrast. Okay, so I want to make sure that I bring the brightness down. So I'm going to go back to my brush, make it nice and large. Make sure that black is my foreground color, all right? And I'm just going to brush onto this area, all right? All right, and I'm still at 1%, okay? If you find that 1% is a little bit, it's not enough, all right? I'm going to go to 5%, okay? And there we go. That's giving me a lot more. Okay. And of course, turn it off, turn it on. just to make sure, and that's looking really, really good. Really, really good. All right, maybe a little bit here, and bring that. Okay, so now the tonality of the arm is about maybe 2 stops darker than the right side of the face. So now those 2 areas are no longer competing for my attention. My eye goes directly to the face, where I want it to go. Okay? Everybody see that? Turn it off. Turn it on. Okay? And then maybe a little bit. There we go. Good. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Before, after. Any questions on dodging and burning? We're good? This takes practice. This takes lots of practice. Okay? So when you start trying these things, all right, especially the dodging and burning, remember, keep it to a very, very low percentage. You want anywhere between 5 and 10%. 1 and 10% on your flow. On your opacity. Okay? You can keep the flow at 100, but keep the opacity down at about 1 to 10%, and you're going to be slowly layering it on. Okay? And I can't stress enough the need for one of these. All right? A tablet and a pen. Tablet and a pen. It makes this job so much easier. You can still do it with a mouse, all right, but you're going to struggle a little bit, all right? But the trick is to go a little bit at a time and practice, okay? All right, so that's the color, the dodge and burn. Now we're going to go to our color, okay? He does not have teeth showing, all right? But give me a second. Let me see if I can find where, come on, my library. Uh-oh. To my Lightroom. There we go. Let's see. I don't know if I want to use another client here. Yeah, why not? I'll use them. Okay. I'll just zoom in really, really close. Okay. Okay. This one has already been retouched. Okay. You can see that I have my spot removal, my dodge and burn, and my skin tone. All right. And if I turn off that dodge and burn, okay, you can see that, he has fairly naturally yellow teeth. He suffers from the same condition I do, yellow teeth. I hate my teeth, man. Let me tell you. All right. And all this is a hue saturation layer. Okay. Here, let me turn this off. All right. Hue saturation layer. You make a new hue saturation layer. Okay. And what you're going to do is you're going to basically just reduce the saturation down. All right. Not so much that it removes all the color. All right. What we're wanting to do is we want to reduce the color of the yellow. Okay. So maybe about 80%. And then sometimes what happens is when you reduce the saturation, sometimes it darkens it a little bit. So oftentimes I might go, 10 to 15 points on the lightness. Okay. So if you turn that off, turn it on, okay? But if you notice, it's affecting the entire layer. You see the skin tone becomes very desaturated. So I'm going to invert my layer, Control I to invert, okay? And that hides everything that I just did. And then I'm going to go grab my brush, okay? Make sure that my opacity is 100%. My flow is at 100%. Okay, opacity 100, flow 100. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is white. Foreground color is white. I size my brush down accordingly, and I'm just going to brush over the areas of the teeth. Okay. All right. Make sure you don't brush onto the gums. We don't want to give them gray gums. That would definitely not look good. Okay. And definitely stay away from the lips. It will remove lip color as well. So you want to keep it just to the teeth area. Okay. So if I show you what the mask looks like, this is what my mask looks like. Okay, just the teeth. All right. And of course, from there, you can make any adjustments that you need. I don't suggest making his teeth completely white if he doesn't have naturally white teeth. You don't want to give him, completely white teeth. Then he's not going to look like himself. What we want to do is we just want to remove that heavy yellow. All right, blend it down a little bit. All right, so you can see it's a very subtle shift, and that's all it is. That's all this layer does. Okay. Any questions? We're good? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that. All right. So obviously, we don't need to worry about teeth whitening here because he's not smiling. He's not showing teeth. So I can get rid of this layer. All right. Again, you take it on a per image basis. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this layer simply because I don't need it taking up space in memory. Okay. Now, this next trick I learned from PixImperfect. And it's a little complicated. And I suggest that if you really want to learn it, that you follow up with PixImperfect channel on YouTube and look at skin correcting by the numbers. All right. What I'll do is when I post this video on YouTube, I'll link his video in the comment section down below, so that you can find it easier. I highly recommend it. All right. But all he does is he created a color chart, a very generic skin tone color chart. Let me zoom in. Okay. That covers pretty much the broad range of skin tone types, from very pale to chocolate colored skin tones. All right. And what they're designed to do is that they're designed to give you kind of like that neutral, warm skin tone, right? So the way it works is that you pull up this chart, okay? And he has it available as a download, okay? And if you notice that there are RGB values, okay? So you can either enter it by RGB value, or the way I prefer is just to use the color picker, okay? But if you notice that my skin color palette is above my skin tone layer, All right. Make sure that it's above your skin tone layer. And my skin tone layer is nothing more than a curves adjustment layer. Okay. Curves adjustment layer. And there's nothing applied to it yet. On the left-hand side, you're going to see that there's the little selector tool. And then right below it are 3 eyedroppers for shadows, midtones, and highlights. Shadows, midtones, and highlights. Okay? What we're going to do is we are going to use our midtone eyedropper, and we're going to sample the skin tone that closest to the skin tone of our subject. Okay? That's why I have this color card right up against his face here. Okay? What I want to do is I want to find the neutral mid-tone area of his skin. All right? So here up on his forehead, maybe on his cheek, all right? Maybe even down in the neck area, all right? But I tend to go kind of like in this area. And I'm going to place it so that the color chart overlaps onto the skin tone, okay? And if you do a slight squint to your eye to remove the detail and just focus on tonality, you can see which skin tone comes the closest, all right? So I can tell that this first one is way too light. He is not that light skinned, all right? He's actually somewhere maybe between the 2 middle ones, but he's closer to this second skin tone than he is anything else. So that's what I'm going to use, okay? I'm going to come down to my curves adjustment, all right, and make sure that the curves adjustment is selected, not the mask. Make sure the curves adjustment is selected. And we are going to double click on that eyedropper. And by double clicking, we actually bring up our color picker. Okay, our color picker. Now, from here, you can take these values, 218, 171, 145, and you can apply it right in here, 218, 171, 145. Or you can do what I do. If you come off your color picker onto the image, when I hover over my target skin tone and click on it, you're going to notice that it changes to that color in my color picker. You can see 218, 171, 145. So for me, that's the easiest way. Just click, I'm done, and I'm going to hit OK. This lets Photoshop know that is the target I want to move my colors to. I want to shift my colors towards that target, okay? And it's going to ask you, do you want to save the new target colors as your default? No, I definitely don't want to be my default, because then, every time you open up your curves adjustment, it's going to apply this color default. I don't want that, so I'm going to go ahead and say no, because it's a one-time use only, okay? And you notice that my color picker is still selected. I'm then going to go to the skin tone on my subject, and I'm going to click on a tone that kind of sort of matches, okay? And you're going to see that there's a shift in our color, right? Shift in our color, right? And you might want to give it a couple of clicks, all right, in slightly different areas. But I'm looking for something that isn't overly red or overly green, right? Now, it's going to be a little bit on the saturated side. That's okay. We're going to address that in a little bit. But I just want the color to be a little bit on the warm side, okay? We want to make them look healthy, right? So we want skin tones that are a little bit on the warm side, okay? And how much warmth? Well, you can play around, okay? But you can see my gray wall is no longer gray, okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hide that layer. I don't need it anymore, okay? And now that color is being applied on everything, all right, which is not what I want. I want to apply it just to his skin tone. So I'm going to go down to my mask, all right? So I have my skin tone layer. I'm going to click on my mask, and I'm going to invert my mask, all right? Control I, inverts it. And what this does is it hides the effect from that layer, okay? I'm going to go ahead and select my brush, all right? I'm going to pick a soft round brush. I'm going to size it appropriately, but I don't want it too soft, okay? I actually want it, if I open up my brush settings, I want it maybe around 80% hardness, all right? So that's going to give me a soft edge, but still hard enough to be able to accomplish what I need, okay? So let me make this a little bit larger, all right? My opacity is going to be at 100%. My flow is going to be at 100%. And my foreground color is going to be white because I'm going to be opening up my mask. And all I'm going to do now is I am just going to paint everywhere there is skin tone. Okay? Skin tone. All right, and now he's looking pretty horrendous. Don't worry about it. Okay? And I'm not going to worry too much about the shadow areas. Okay? And here is where we can make a decision. All right? His beard, it's really going to warm up his beard. So do I want to include his beard? All right? If you say no, all I got to do is I switch my foreground color to black. And where his beard was is I just erase those areas. Okay? And now I have a more neutral looking beard. All right? And switch back to white to make sure that I still have all my skin tone. Okay? This area here. And just take your time. You know, you don't have to be right 100% up against there. Okay? But you don't want to be sloppy either. Okay? You just want to get all the skin tone. Notice I'm not even bothering with the areas that are in shadow. I'm just going to target the areas that are bright because I'm looking to change the true tone color. True tone color, not the shadow color. True tone color and the highlight color. Let me back that up. All right, so he's looking pretty damn orange. Okay, but we're in the ballpark of what we need. Okay, and now I can take my opacity and I can bring it down. Okay. And about 50%, I'm looking at his face. 50% looks good. Okay. But now I'm looking at his arms, and his arms look pretty bad. Okay. It's a little bit too much on his arms. All right. So now at this point, I can do a couple of things. I could forego doing any tone modification to his arms. So if I switch back to my brush, make it nice and large, change it to black being my foreground, and if I remove that from there, that doesn't look too bad, okay? Or what you can do is you can say, okay, well, I want some color there, but not as intense as what was on his face. All right, so because I've already done the work, I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate my layer. So Control J duplicates it, okay? And I'm going to, let me hide one. I'm going to erase from the arms on this one and just keep the face. And you can probably guess what my next step is. All right, on my second one, I'm going to erase the face area, but keep the arms. All right, and you can see 50% is a little bit too much, so maybe I'm going to bring it down to about 20%, 15%. 15% looks good, right? And then if I turn that on, I go to my group, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. You can see that it warms up the skin without looking completely horrendous. Okay? Any questions on that? All right. Like I said, this one's going to be another one where it takes some practice to get used to. All right. But as you can see, it offers you a lot of flexibility. Okay. Now here's another. Let's take it a step further. Okay. If I zoom in, okay, to his face, I'm going to turn off that color grading. Turn it off. Turn it back on. Okay. What I want you to do is I want you to look at this section right here, the shadow side. Okay. Just look at that section as I turn it off and turn it on. Okay. You'll notice that it warmed up the shadow areas as well. Okay. If that's a look that you want, by all means. But typically, anything that is in shadow tends to cool off as far as color tone goes. Okay? So if you find that this is happening and you don't want it to really affect your shadows areas, right? Especially because, you know, like I said, he's got that split lighting going on him, right? Let me turn it back on. If I double click on my layer, all right, I either double click on my layer, you know, off to the side here, or if I come down to the bottom and I hit that little FX symbol, okay, I usually just do the double click because it's easier. It's going to open up my effects, my layer style or layer effects dialog box. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a blend if. Blend if. Okay. So it's saying blend if this layer is this value. Okay. So in other words, what I want to do is I want to protect the shadows of the underlying layer. All right. Because the layer I'm working on is nothing more than a curves adjustment. Okay. I want to protect the shadows underneath. All right. So I'm going to the underlying layer and I'm going to go to the shadows area and I'm going to pull away. All right. If you notice here, I have my blacks here. All right. And I have my whites here. Okay. And then here would be my 50%. Okay, makes sense? Okay, so all my shadows are in where? My black section here, right? Blacks. I'm going to pull away from that edge. And you're going to notice here that we're losing all that color cast. All right, so if I slide back, you can see the warm orangey look, right? And I pull it back. I pull it back just to where I want my transition to be. All right. And you notice that that transition is pretty harsh. It's pretty ugly. Right. So by pressing and holding my Alt key, or what is it? Option key for Mac people. If I hold my Alt key and I click on that little pip there, it splits it. And all this does is it gives me my soft transition edge. Okay? And it makes that transition a little bit smoother. Okay? Did you see what I did there, or do you want me to go over it again? Go over it again? Okay. All right. So I'm going to bring this back. All right. Actually, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. Hopefully that'll work. All right. So again, what I want you to pay attention to is this shadow here on the dark side of his face. All right. That's where you need to look. All right. So you can see that it's got a reddish, orangey cast to it. All right. So if I turn that cancel. If I turn that layer off, you can see now it's very kind of like cool. As soon as I turn that layer back on, it warmed up. Double click on my layer, brings up my layer style. Okay. The default is my blending options. Right here is my blend if. Okay. I'm going to take the blacks from my underlying layer, okay, which is the layer that contains my subject, and I want to protect the shadows. This is what I'm protecting. All right. So right now, because this little pip is all the way to the edge, it's telling Photoshop to include all that dark area as part of that color cast. All right. So by pulling away, I'm telling Lightroom or Photoshop to exclude anything from this point that way. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention here. All right. I want to look here until I see that shadow come back. All right. So see how we're losing that color cast? That's gone way too far. I bring it back. Okay. Right about there. But we see this transition here. There's this transition right along here where it's cool here and warm here. All right. That's a very, very noticeable, very kind of jagged, pixelated blend. Right. So to change that, I'm going to Alt Option key, and my little pip here, I'm just going to split it. So you take the left and the right and you split them apart. Okay. And what that does is it softens the transition along that edge. All right. Okay. And then that's it. So now, when I zoom back out a little bit, now when I toggle that effect on and off, that's without, that's with, you can see that it's only targeting the bright areas of the skin tone, which is what we want. Okay. Now, of course, I can zoom in, and if I look at my mask, all right, it's a little sloppy. I can go ahead and, if I want to, make sure that I don't get the eyes. All right, and just get the area around it. I want the eyes. Okay. There we go. Without the color correction, with the color correction. And now I can call this portrait done. And the last thing I do is I take my skin blemish check layer and my spot check layer and I get rid of them. Okay? I don't need them, so let's not have them taking up any room. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and click Save. All right. And you're going to see right up here, it's going to let you know the percentage it's saving. It always stalls out at the last 1%. And then when it's gone, I come back to Lightroom. Let's go, where was my edge? Okay. All right, here's my original, all right, my raw file, and it's going to create that TIFF file that I was just working in Photoshop. It adds it back into my catalog, all right, and because this had a yellow flag on it, all right, it's going to keep it with the yellow flag, okay. This one, I can get rid of that yellow flag. And because now, for me, this is almost done enough, I'm going to go ahead and change the color to green. Okay, there's only one more thing that I sometimes do, all right, and that is add a little bit of a vignette. All right, so I go to my develop, and I have my vignettes, all right. Usually I keep it to about +10, +20, all right. In this case, I'm probably not going to add any at all, all right. I kind of, I don't know, I kind of like maybe 10, all right. Just that little bit. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my final crop. Okay, so I'm going to remove a little bit of that head space, place his head a little bit kind of centered there. Okay, I want to make sure I don't cut off his jacket. I don't want to cut off his elbow. That looks fairly decent. Click done. That's what it looks like. And I can now call it quits. Okay. From here, I right click, I go export, and I have my headshots, portraits export. I'm going to export it at a high res. You'll see the progress bar right up there, and voila, here it is. This is my finished product. Okay. Okay. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. We'll go to the chat window. Questions, comments, concerns. Do I need to offer a cleaning wipe for all the brain cells that got destroyed?
No one asked me.
Ask me. Yeah. All right. So
Actually, you had a good time tonight.
good. Hopefully, you picked up a few new tricks. Okay. And like I said, this just happens to be the workflow that's comfortable for me. I find it fairly easy. It takes me, all right, what was that? That was about 2 hours, right? But that was 2 hours with a lot of explanation. Sitting down, going from start to finish, depending on the complexity of the portrait, it can take me anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes, right? For a full, very decent photo retouching on a person, okay? Obviously, not every portrait is going to require all that kind of work, but you never know, okay? All right. I guess if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a text message or email. You can always refer back to this lesson once it gets uploaded to YouTube. I'll make sure. Let me write a note to myself. I'll make sure that I link PixImperfect.
How are you spelling that?
PixImperfect is Pix, and then the word imperfect. Yeah, like not perfect. PixImperfect.
Is that two words?
No, it's all one word.
Okay.
PixImperfect. That's the name of his channel. The instructor, his name is Unmesh Dinda. He's India. But my God, he's such an awesome teacher. All right.
Is that his channel on YouTube?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. He does a lot with Adobe when they hold their training sessions, and their conferences. He does a lot of live teaching through there as well as his own channel. So, okay, guys, any questions? All right. So now, all right, go out, corral a family member, a friend, your next door neighbor, all right, a stranger walking down the street if you have to. Set up a nice little portrait. Take your time with your portraits. This is not about, yelling, "Hey," and then clicking when they turn to you. Right? It's not a grab shot. Okay? Pay attention to your light. Okay? And then go ahead and apply some of these lessons to when you retouch it. Okay? And then go ahead and send it in to me. All right? Bob, are you still on? Did Bob leave? Bob left. Okay. All right. Bob sent me in his, all right, and I responded back to him to let him know that I had received it, and his email got bounced back saying it was undeliverable, but with some weird Apple friggin' email address. I don't know what's going on, so I wanted to mention it to him, and he scooted out of here before I could. So anyway. If anybody knows Bob and can get a hold of him, you might want to let him know that there's something going on with his email. All right, guys. As always, it was a pleasure.
Thanks, Doug.
I look forward to seeing what you guys create for the photo challenge, and then we'll see you for Q&A next Monday.
Doug, I'll let Bob know for you.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All righty, guys. Stay safe.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.